In order to make a watercolor background, please make sure that you stretch your watercolor paper first. So that is in a previous video. So remember, you should soak your paper for 5 to 10 minutes in lukewarm water and then tape it down to a surface. So remember that at home, we're using our masonite board and we're using some packing tape. This is an old example from a previous year where we stapled it to a piece of birch wood. So in the demonstrations that's to follow, I show you 3 different techniques. I want you to realize that you should be using one of these techniques as your background. So at the end, hopefully it will be looking like what you see on your screen right now. You should have one soft with light to medium details, values as your background, so that you can then layer your imagery on top. So what I wanted to do was to remind you about some of your specialty or more advanced watercolor techniques that would work really well for a background. So what I would suggest that you do is grab one of your brushes that will hold a lot of water. And so the paper I have stretched onto a piece of board. This is the method I use when I'm in school with students. Instead of using the tape I gave you, I use staples on a piece of birch wood. But this way is really heavy and tedious. And so I gave you another method if you are remote. So you'll use that method. So I soak the paper. Right? I soak the paper and it's actually wet right now. This is actually an old piece from a previous year that I thought I should get rid of. So what I'm going to do is show you some background techniques. I'll start first with salt, paper towel, and then plastic wrap. And so what I would like you to do is to use the colors in your color scheme. So I'm going to go ahead and say in this salt effect that I'm going to use the blue for my color scheme. And I can add some plain water to it. And remember, to get the salt to work, right, you need to have water down, right? And so right now I just have one color. You could incorporate other colors as well. You just don't want it to get too dark. So maybe I plop in some of the yellow. I'm cleaning my brush when I go to get fresh paint so I'm not contaminating, right? And so then what you'll do is you will just sprinkle the color in, right? And you have to have some patience. When you are sprinkling your salt in, remember you don't want to use a lot. You're thinking about like you're salting food, you want to make sure it's very minimal. And so as this dries, you're going to get kind of a speckled effect, right? So keep that in mind. You would want to let this dry and you wouldn't want to touch it. The next one is really simple and straightforward. I'll just go ahead and use the same color so that you guys can do kind of a comparison. I'll go ahead and put some blue down. Now I grabbed the blue from this set that I already add water to, and if I want to control that color more, I could put it in a big well and stir, 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 so that I'm not getting a lot of dark chunks. You might have noticed that from my first one. And so I'm gonna go in and kind of spread this color out. This one, I'm making a little softer. I think backgrounds should start light, right? It's okay if it has a few medium or dark values here or there, but you want to keep it pretty light, okay? Something I didn't show you in the other one that I wanted to, which was this kind of like drip method. You can, right, while the paint is wet, you could tilt your board. So you could pick it up and tilt it. And you can get some really cool effects by letting the paint kind of drip down. And I often do, have to kind of collect some of it at the end, right? Remember, you'll get some water blossoms here. So if you don't want that, you might want to blot that up with paper towel or brushes. Okay, so then while this is still wet, you're doing paper towel effect, you want to go in there and kind of blot at it with your paper towel. Now you want texture. You want it to be able to see the paper towel. So you don't want to over blot that. Notice how it's picking up light areas. If I'm like, oh, I don't like that, I went too light, you could always add some more back, right? And go back in there and add more. I find that using a fresh paper towel, one that is really stiff, oops, sorry, my hair and my head in the way, works best for this method because you tend to get more texture. So the nice thing about some of these is while they're wet, you can kind of go back in and kind of play. And so if I wanted to add more yellow, I could do that too, right? I let this drip. You can see that my colors are pooling here. This is probably why this paper was never used, is because it had scratches across it. I might want to throw some more salt in this so that I can get that effect. So I'm just gonna do a little bit more and hope that when it dries, we can get a salt effect. Right. So the last one that I'm gonna show you on this segment is to use plastic wrap. So what you'd wanna do is same thing. All right, let's go ahead and plop in some of our colors. Once again, remember, nice and light. My paper's starting to dry on me. All right, so remember you can stretch the color by adding just some water to it. Maybe I want to put some areas of dark. And then let me go ahead and grab some of that yellow again. Kind of blop some yellow in there. And so while it's still wet, I'm just using saran wrap or plastic wrap, and I'm gonna lay it on top of the surface. Now we want it to kind of wrinkle and bunch, and this will stay pretty sticky. So it will hold itself down onto the surface, and basically wherever there's a wrinkle, you're gonna get a texture. So leave this to sit and dry, and then you can work on some other part of your process, maybe cutting a stencil or planning your composition while you let this dry. So here are the 3 different techniques. By looking at these, the salt effect, probably because I dripped it, didn't work very well. So what I mean by that is you should let it drip first and then add the salt, because it probably merged too much with the background color. So here's an example of what salt effect should look like if it's undisturbed and allowed to dry. So you see here it kind of looks like frost in a way. So that one wasn't so great, but if you make a mistake, it's not that big a deal because you can always make your background look more intentional. So maybe if I don't like it, I can go back in and add more water or more color, right? To make it seem like I meant it to look that way. You could always go in and maybe use another technique to add texture. So here's that paper towel again, or maybe you want to lay the plastic wrap on top of it. Paper towel, depending on the kind of paper towel you use, either one that's more crisp or more soft, you'll get kind of a soft sort of effect that's kind of cloud-like. And then saran wrap will have a bunch of edges. So wherever there was bunched up saran wrap, you'll see that it will collect the value, it will collect the pigment, and you'll get kind of a shard, like shards or pieces of glass kind of effect.